Good morning. I'd like to talk with you today about judgment, discernment, power, and grace. I think judgment, perhaps, is the trickiest of these terms. In one sense, having good judgment is understood as a positive quality. To have good judgment in general is to carefully discern which choice to make when provided with a variety of options. When preparing a house for renting, as I did for 5 weeks this summer in Kentucky, it meant deciding on a daily basis which tasks should be done first, which boxes packed, which cleaning jobs to tackle, which things to take, which to donate or give away, which to sell, which to discard. To engage in this process of judgment, of discernment, day after day, can be exhausting. At the same time, a kind of rhythm develops. The process often becomes nearly automatic, and the satisfaction derived from clearing out spaces, making room, organizing things, creates a kind of feedback loop where decision-making leads to satisfaction, and small satisfactions lead to a clearer decision-making process. It's a healthy process that clears the mind as it clears the living space. As a Kentucky friend might say, it's all good. There's another kind of judgment, though, that is not all good. In fact, it often leads to hurt feelings, damaged relationships, broken trust, withdrawal, and sometimes bitter verbal exchanges. This kind of judgment might better be called judgmentalism. When we practice judgmentalism, we place ourselves in a superior position to others and so establish a center of power. This leads to a sense of superiority, which may seem earned, but is in fact unearned. We may indeed have superior skills or talents in one area or another, but when we claim superiority over another person, because of these skills or talents, we are privileging these particular qualities over other qualities which may be as important. To quote Jesus of Nazareth, as presented in the Gospel of Matthew, we need to first remove the beam out of our own eye, and then we can see clearly to remove the speck out of our brother's eye. The litany of prejudices that exist in our society bear witness to this tendency towards judgmentalism. The belief that one race is superior to another. The belief that one sex is superior to another. The belief that one sexual orientation is superior to another. The belief that so-called Aryans are superior to Jews. The belief that being born in a socioeconomic class makes one superior to someone born in another class. The belief that Americans are inherently superior to people from another country. The belief that people with an athletic build are superior to people who are overweight or underweight. The belief that professions are superior to trades. The belief that a higher IQ makes a person better than other persons. The belief that one religious tradition holds truth and all others are spurious. All these positions start with self-centeredness. All these positions start with an assumption that the position one holds in a society or a culture is the standard against which all other positions must be judged. It is fallacious, but we all have a tendency to that kind of thinking. One of the functions of church, I think, is to remind us of this, not to act as our conscience, but to remind us to examine our unexamined beliefs, unwarranted assumptions, and to make a course correction that will lead us on a truer path. Our fifth principle reminds us to honor the right of conscience in each individual, but sometimes we need to be reminded to honor our own conscience, to refer to its authority rather than the authority of our sometimes prejudicial assumptions. Conflicts in churches, and here I hasten to add that I'm not referring to this particular church or any unresolved conflict that may exist here. Conflict in churches often come about as a result of holding on too tightly to one position that might seem naturally and even obviously true, but that prevents us from being open to a fresh point of view and the light that may be shed from another perspective. Last week we spoke about the variety of personalities that exist in any group, church congregations included. A variety of personalities provides a variety of perspectives. Other personalities, other perspectives should be viewed as a resource rather than an obstacle for achieving shared goals. Who knows? Maybe in another season, we too might view the situation in a way new to us. Remember the story of the pear tree and the 4 sons that Kelly shared with us this morning? A little bit about my personal history might help you understand my interest in this subject and my determination to continue to enlarge my own perspective as I age and grow. In the early years of my life and the life of my brother, and to a lesser extent, the life of my sister Mary, my mother was the only voice of authority in the home, as my father, suffering from tuberculosis as he was, spent much of our early years in a sanitarium operated by the VA, the Veterans Administration, in Rutland Heights, Massachusetts. Each night after supper, my mother, brother, sister, and I would kneel around my parents' bed and say the rosary together, dedicated as a prayer to my father's recovery and safe return home. Our mother's perspective on child rearing, with all its tenderness, reassurance, impatience sometimes, and mistakes occasionally, was the only perspective we knew. My father, when he came home, was a different can of beans, or a different kettle of fish, or a different judge and jury. He was largely silent, emotionally distant, strangely masculine, and in many ways a foreigner in the home. In some ways, I'm sure, we learned to think of him as an invader. The first memory I have of him was when he punished me for a childish transgression by yanking me up by my left arm and striking me on the bottom 5 times. Bam, 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 bam. This in front of a fellow 6-year-old, a girl I thought of as my girlfriend. This experience, of course, imprinted itself on me in a number of ways, primarily causing me to distrust male authority, and more productively, to learn to resent and resist any authority that seemed illegitimate. Legitimacy must be earned, and it was earned through trust, based on respect, affection, and love. My judgment of what constitutes legitimate authority was informed in large part by this perspective learned through this experience. As I matured in judgment, always wanting to earn my father's affection, and always, or almost always, falling short, resentment solidified, and a desire to break free of his influence predominated as a motive for growth. Only after I was able to break free, able to achieve hard-won independence and the early stages of autonomy, was I able to ask the important question, what experiences formed my father in such a way that his impulse for corrective action toward a child's misbehavior was to lash out, establish authority in the moment through force, and routinely through intimidation. My father provided no information for answering this riddle. Never. My mother took the initiative to explain that my father's mother and his beloved sister Julia died of tuberculosis, the same disease that my father suffered from in Ireland when my father was a child. For the years between his mother's death and his father's eventual remarriage, My father and his sister were sent to live with their grandmother, while his brother was brought up by an uncle and wife, and the uncle's wife. My father's own bond with his mother was tragically broken through no fault of his own, and his life was disrupted. Did his adoptive parents love and cherish him? I have no way of knowing. But it appears that the stepmother he acquired once his father remarried fit the stereotypical role of the evil stepmother, at least according to my cousin Barbara, who seems to know about these things. Learning the circumstances of my father's upbringing did not cause me to open my heart to him in quick forgiveness, but it did provide me with much needed information for understanding his conduct and character. It allowed me to understand just how much of our personality formation is due to circumstances beyond our control and the human inclination to control those things which seem out of our control. I learned through my childhood that in times of crisis, my father tended to panic, especially when it was clear that he had responsibility for managing a situation. That explains why he never learned to drive, after panicking during a driving lesson, running the car off the road and into a tree. It explains why he was left when he was left in charge of the kids when my mother was not at home, his impulse, when circumstances got out of control, was to lash out at us. When he was too directly confronted by his shortcomings, he grasped wildly for whatever might make him appear to be in control. It was a way of avoiding the shame he felt at being inadequate to the tasks assigned by life. My own experiences inform my way of seeing the world. As competencies developed over time, and I received assurances from those whose role it was to pass judgment on my progress, I grew more confident in my judgment and my discernment ability. The work I did in psychotherapy and journaling and adult education classes and in meditation, no doubt, helped me to grow in understanding and for understanding to inform judgment. I learned from my father to distrust my own judgment. It's been a lifetime's chore to overcome that impulse, and there are times, of course, when I'm not successful. I remember in my 20s, if I was uncertain about which direction to take after exiting from a highway, I would find myself habitually going off in the wrong direction. Only by carefully paying attention to my thought pattern did I realize I was thinking, this is probably the wrong way, so let me do this first and get it out of the way. Accept my punishment, so then I can make the right decision later. That's some serious imprinting of behavior. And it took serious and intentional awareness to recognize the pattern and begin to make adjustments. I tell these stories because I believe you have such stories of your own, behaviors that have been imprinted from early experiences that can be addressed by paying close attention to your thought patterns. Over and over again, from the publication of Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence in 1995 to 2022's What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, we learn that the root of our behavior is in the emotions. Our first impulses come from fear or reassurance, reaction or responsiveness. Only by examining the impulses which initially motivate us can we begin to make the changes that will lead to healthy growth and healthy behavior in whatever communities we choose to be a part of. First comes impulse, then comes examination, then comes understanding, then comes judgment. If we don't take the time to complete this circuit, we jump immediately from impulse to judgment. We need to watch out for that. As many of you know, I had a bit of a rough start when I arrived in Middleboro 25 days ago. After driving over 700 miles in 2 days, I stopped in Parkersburg, West Virginia, to add a quart of oil to the car's engine. A couple of hours later, the check engine light came on and stayed on. I drove a couple of 100 miles uncertain of the roadworthiness and safety of the vehicle. The reason that the check engine light came on was because after adding the oil, I forgot to return the cap to the oil port. As a result, the only thing keeping the oil in the engine was the padded hood of the car. As I told this story to parishioners and friends, I had to decide whether or not to include this detail of my incompetence. Would I be subject to harsh judgment and stated or unstated ridicule? Would there be that familiar look of chagrin and the shake of the head that says, hopeless? Or would people understand that we all make boneheaded mistakes sometimes, especially when en route to a new and uncertain destination? So, I told the tale in one place or another, taking a risk or not, as the situation seemed to suggest. I never felt harshly judged, actually. That provided a note of reassurance. Then, my hearing aids refused to work properly. One would work, the other would not. One responded to amateur cleaning, the other seemed jammed no matter what I did. And then, catastrophe. I lost them. I couldn't believe it. I didn't have the case at the time I took them out, so I made a mental note that I was leaving them in an unfamiliar place. And then I lost the note. This went on for over a week, 9 days, I think. Then, while looking for a backup and quite inferior pair of hearing aids, I opened up the drop-leaf desk in the living room, and lo and behold, there were the hearing aids. I had taken them out while doing my back exercises. While they were missing, though, I had to decide what to say to various church folk. A minister is supposed to provide leadership. You can't look terminally incompetent in your first month of service and expect to retain the respect and patience of the congregation. But I took the risk and said exactly what happened. I left them in an unfamiliar place and then forgot where that place was. In one case, the person suggested places I might look. In another case, I received the smile. That said, I know that feeling. No judgment. Instead, grace. I call it grace when someone decides not to pass judgment on me, when someone offers unearned forgiveness, when someone recognizes in me a shared humanity, weakness and incompetencies and all. Grace is an alternative to passing judgment. Grace is an option. None of this is to suggest that we should not be subject to legitimately functioning judgment. A minister is subject to periodic review by the congregation under the aegis of the board of directors, or here, the parish committee. The parish committee is subject to review by the congregation as a whole. While in preliminary fellowship, ordained ministers are subject to an annual evaluation by the UUA's Ministerial Fellowship Committee. And many of you are or have been employed in the positions that mandated review, judgment by management. All of this is, or should be, legitimate. It's judgmentalism that we have to be aware of. How do you know if the judgment that you issue is too harsh, that it veers into judgmentalism? A good guide is in the response of the person who's feeling judged. That look of hurt that appears in the eyes, that quick but subtle drawing back, the narrowing of the eyes and drawing together of the brows. or in some cases, the sharp retort. Observing these responses requires applying your emotional intelligence, your ability to pick up on nonverbal cues, something I'm sure we'll talk about on another Sunday. What do you do if you feel unfairly judged? Indulge in a little gossip, telling others about your hurt, complaining about their mistreatment, forming a little anti-someone group. Not a good or healthy response, of course. If you are feeling emotionally, or I'm sure you didn't mean to be hurtful right now, but that last remark was pretty sharp. And if you're not feeling so emotionally secure, you might want to approach a minister or seek some advice about how to address the issue. I think he'll be willing to listen. He has some familiarity with the issue on both sides of the experience. Or if you are feeling particularly secure in yourself and have developed enough sympathetic understanding of the factors that lead to reactive behavior, you might be in a position to extend a little grace, the olive branch of grace. In the words of today's musical offering, it is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. Let us make it so.